It was another ordinary morning at the school. The hallways smelled faintly of chalk and old books, and students were chatting, laughing, and rushing to get to their seats before the assembly started. Among them was a boy who often went unnoticed. He didn't raise his hand much in class. He didn't try to draw attention to himself. Most people barely noticed he existed. His name was Ayan. Ayan wasn't like the students who were always talking, joking, or showing off. He was quiet, calm, and often lost in his own world. People sometimes thought being quiet meant he was shy or not very smart. Some even called him lazy, though they didn't know the truth. The truth was that Ayan had a secret that nobody suspected. He could play the piano, and not just a little. He had been learning by himself for years, quietly practicing on an old, second-hand keyboard that his parents had managed to get for him. Every evening, after finishing his homework, he would sit there and lose himself in the music. He didn't need anyone to tell him he was good. For him, the music was enough. But at school, nobody knew about it. To everyone else, he was just the quiet boy in the corner. Teachers often assumed he didn't have much going on. And some students even made fun of him sometimes for being invisible. It didn't bother Ayan. He had learned long ago that not everyone needed to understand him. He just needed to focus on what made him happy. That morning, the school hall was buzzing more than usual. It was the day of the assembly, and everyone knew it. The principal liked to call students up randomly, sometimes to ask questions, sometimes just to make a point. Students often whispered nervously whenever the principal's eyes scanned the crowd, because nobody wanted to be embarrassed in front of everyone. Ayan, of course, hoped the principal would not notice him. He sat quietly on the wooden bench, keeping his hands folded and his eyes fixed on the floor dot around him. Some students were joking about who might get called up. "Bet it's going to be someone who didn't do their homework," one whispered. "Yeah, probably that quiet kid over there," another muttered, pointing in Ayan's direction. They giggled. Ayan heard them but didn't react. He had learned a long time ago that reacting only gave people the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. The principal walked to the front of the hall, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. His voice was sharp, commanding. "This morning," he said, "I want to remind everyone that talent is not just about being loud or popular. Sometimes the most surprising skills come from the quietest people." A murmur went through the students. Some rolled their eyes, thinking it was just another one of the principal's speeches. Then he looked directly at Ayan. Ayan felt a little chill run down his spine. He hadn't expected this. The principal's eyes were sharp, almost challenging, and slowly he said, "Ayan, come up to the stage." The room went silent for a moment, and all eyes turned to him. Some students smirked, thinking this was going to be embarrassing. Maybe the principal would ask him a question he couldn't answer or make him do something silly. Ayan's heart beat faster, but he didn't panic. He stood up slowly, feeling every pair of eyes following him. His steps felt heavier than usual as he walked toward the stage. When he reached the stage, the principal didn't smile. He spoke again, almost with a sneer. "Can you show everyone what you can do? Let's see if all that quietness means anything." The words stung a little, but Ayan kept his head up. Deep down, he knew that this was his moment. Even if it was meant to humiliate him, he had the chance to show who he really was. He walked to the piano. It looked bigger than he remembered, with shiny black and white keys reflecting the bright lights of the hall. He put his hands on the keys and paused for a moment. The students were whispering again, some snickering, some curious. He took a deep breath. In that quiet second, he remembered all the nights he had practiced alone, the times he had stayed up late just to get the notes right. All the frustration, all the mistakes, all the effort had all led to this moment. Ayan was ready, even though he felt nervous. He let the first note float across the hall. It was soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. The sound caught everyone off guard. The students who had been whispering stopped. The teachers, too, looked surprised. Something in that first note made them sit up and pay attention. Ayan didn't rush. He let each note flow, letting the music tell his story instead of words. At that moment, the quiet boy everyone had ignored was no longer invisible. Every student, every teacher, every person in the hall could feel that there was something special about him. The music wasn't just notes anymore. It was his courage, his patience, and his heart. And the principal, who had meant to embarrass him, looked on without saying a word. Ayan smiled just a little to himself. He had no idea what would happen next, but for now, he was playing his heart out. He had turned a moment meant to humiliate him into a chance to shine. And in that simple, quiet way, he had already begun to change how everyone saw him. The hall was unusually quiet now. The principal's eyes were fixed on Ayan, expecting him to falter. He had called Ayan up with the intention of embarrassing him, but something about the boy's calmness already made the principal hesitate. The students were still whispering, some exchanging doubtful glances, some rolling their eyes, waiting for Ayan to fail. But Ayan didn't notice them. He was focused, standing in front of the piano, his fingers hovering above the keys. The principal cleared his throat, his tone sharp and challenging. "Well?" he said. "Can you play something? Let's see if all this quietness means anything." There was a faint smirk on his face as if he already knew the answer. He expected silence or fumbling. He expected embarrassment. But Ayan didn't flinch. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. It was the first time many students had seen him like this, not sitting quietly in class, not hiding in the background, but standing tall, ready to face the whole school. A small part of him felt nervous. After all, he had never performed in front of such a big crowd before. But he reminded himself of all the evenings he had spent alone, practicing on the old keyboard at home. Every mistake, every repeated note, every quiet evening spent learning by himself. This was his moment to show what he had worked for. The principal, impatient, tapped his fingers on the podium. "Go on," he said. "Let's hear it." Some students giggled, thinking he would freeze, thinking he would fail. But Ayan didn't look at them. He let his hands fall on the keys. The first note rang out, soft and clear, filling the hall in a way nobody expected. Immediately, the whispers stopped. Heads turned toward him. Teachers raised their eyebrows. Some students leaned forward in surprise. The sound was so pure, so confident, that it demanded attention. Ayan's fingers moved carefully, confidently now, following the melody he had practiced countless times. The hall, once full of chatter and expectation, became silent except for the music. Ayan's heart raced a little, but he felt a strange calm too. It was like the piano was a safe place, a place where the judgment of others didn't matter. Each note told a story of quiet determination, of patience, of hours spent alone learning and improving. The students who had doubted him felt a strange mix of surprise and admiration. They had never realized that someone so quiet could be so talented. The principal's expression changed slowly. At first, he was smug, thinking he had the upper hand. But as the music flowed, his smirk faded. He hadn't expected this. He realized he had underestimated the boy. His plan to humiliate him was not working at all. In fact, it was backfiring. Ayan wasn't embarrassed. He was shining. A few students who had whispered mean comments earlier felt embarrassed themselves. They didn't know where to look. Some hid behind their hands. Some stared in awe. Even the students who usually ignored Ayan had to pay attention now. The quiet boy had taken over the entire hall with his music. It wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't about showing off. It was about talent, dedication, and heart, and everyone could feel it. Ayan didn't rush. He played each note with care. Some notes were soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. Some were stronger, more confident, filling the room with a rhythm that made people sit up straighter. The music flowed naturally, as if he wasn't thinking at all, just letting his hands do what they had learned over countless hours. The principal shifted uncomfortably. He had expected an awkward silence, a nervous fumble, a small mistake that would allow him to laugh. But there was no mistake. Not one. Ayan was steady, confident, and completely in control. The principal's eyes followed his hands, and for the first time that day, he didn't know what to say. The plan to humiliate had completely failed. Some teachers whispered quietly to each other. "He's amazing," one said. Another shook their head in disbelief. Students who had teased him before looked ashamed, realizing how wrong they had been. Ayan, who had been invisible for so long, was suddenly the center of everyone's attention, and not because of misbehavior or mistakes, but because of his talent. As the music continued, the room seemed to hold its breath. Each note carried more than sound. It carried emotion. It carried years of practice done in secret. It carried courage, because it wasn't easy to stand in front of a crowd, especially one that expected you to fail. And yet, Ayan played on, letting the music speak for him. Finally, after several minutes, he reached the last notes of his piece. They were soft, gentle, and lingering, like a message that demanded reflection. The silence that followed was powerful. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The principal, who had tried to embarrass him, now looked stunned. The students' faces showed disbelief. Even some of the teachers who had known about his quiet nature seemed amazed. Ayan had not just played a piece of music. He had captured everyone's attention and respect. The room seemed to realize something important in that silence. Quiet people often have hidden talents. Judging someone by what you see on the surface is never accurate. Sometimes the ones who don't boast, who don't fight for attention, are the ones who have worked the hardest behind the scenes. Ayan had proved this without saying a single word, just through his music. When the final note faded, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds longer. Then, slowly, the students began to clap. One by one, the clapping grew louder until the entire hall was applauding. Some students were standing now, cheering. The principal finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "Well, that was unexpected," he admitted. "Very well done." Ayan felt a small smile on his face. He had not only survived the moment meant to humiliate him, but had turned it into a chance to show who he really was. The students who had doubted him now looked at him differently. The teachers who had assumed he was invisible now had a new respect for him. And the principal, who had intended to embarrass him, had been forced to acknowledge his talent. As Ayan stepped away from the piano and returned to his seat, he felt a strange mixture of relief and pride. He knew that this was only the beginning. The hall would remember this moment, and more importantly, he had shown himself what he was capable of. From that day on, the quiet boy who had always stayed in the background was no longer invisible. People would see him in a new light, and perhaps he would finally be able to pursue his passion with the recognition it deserved. Ayan sat back in his seat for a moment, trying to calm the racing of his heart. His hands still tingled from the touch of the piano keys, and the memory of each note lingered in his mind like a warm echo. The applause had been loud, unexpected, and overwhelming, but it was more than just noise. It was recognition. It was proof that all the years he had spent practicing alone, hidden from everyone, were not wasted. He looked around the hall and saw the faces of the students who had once whispered about him, laughing behind his back or ignoring him completely. Their expressions had changed. Some stared with wide eyes, unable to hide their surprise. Some even looked a little guilty, realizing how wrong they had been about him. The students who had assumed that quiet meant weak were now silent, caught off guard by what they had just witnessed. Ayan knew this was only the beginning. He felt a small spark of confidence growing inside him, the kind of confidence that comes not from showing off, but from realizing your own potential. He could feel that his life at school was about to change. People might start seeing him differently, not just as the quiet boy in the corner, but as someone with talent, determination, and courage. The principal cleared his throat again, his usual sharp tone softened by genuine surprise. "Ayan," he said slowly, "I did not expect that. That was extraordinary." His words carried a weight Ayan had never heard before from him. The principal had always been strict, often critical, sometimes even harsh, but today he sounded almost humbled. It was strange to see this side of him. The principal stepped closer to the stage, nodding slightly. "You have a real gift," he added, "and you should not keep it hidden." Ayan's eyes widened slightly. He wasn't used to praise like this, especially not in front of so many people. He had practiced for himself, not for recognition. Music had always been his escape, a private world where he could be himself without judgment. But hearing the principal acknowledge his talent in front of everyone, it felt different. It felt like the world was finally noticing him for who he really was. Some students began talking quietly among themselves. pointing at Ayan and whispering about how talented he was. A few of the teachers who had always been kind to him but had never fully realized his skill exchanged looks of admiration. The music teacher, in particular, looked proud, a smile playing on their lips. They had suspected he had potential, but seeing him perform like this, in front of a full hall, exceeded all expectations. Ayan's mind wandered for a moment to the countless evenings he had spent at home, fingers on the keys of his old, worn-out piano. No one had watched him then? No one had cheered or clapped or said, "You're amazing." He had learned to be patient with himself, to keep practicing even when mistakes made him frustrated, to trust that one day he would be ready. And now, standing in front of the whole school, that preparation had paid off. Every struggle, every lonely practice session had led to this moment. He noticed some students trying to hide their surprise, their previous arrogance replaced by curiosity. A few of them even gave him small nods, as if acknowledging silently, "You've earned our respect." That small recognition meant more than any words. Ayan realized that sometimes actions speak louder than words. Today he had shown them who he really was without having to say a single sentence. The principal, regaining some of his composure, decided to speak again. "Talent like yours deserves to be nurtured," he said. "I expect you to continue sharing it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who can learn from you." His tone was serious now, but there was a warmth in it that had never been there before. Ayan nodded quietly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He hadn't asked for attention, but he realized that sharing his gift could inspire others too. Some students, emboldened by what they had seen, started clapping again, this time more loudly. Cheering for Ayan, the hall was alive with energy, filled with admiration, surprise, and a new kind of respect. It was a feeling that Ayan had never experienced before at school. He had always been invisible, overlooked, underestimated. But now, in a way, he had transformed that perception. Ayan's gaze returned to the piano. The instrument had been his companion for so long, a silent witness to his efforts, struggles, and victories. It had listened without judgment, responded to his fingers with every note, and allowed him to express what words could not. Today, it had helped him tell a story to the entire school without saying a single word. Even the students who had doubted him most were now watching with awe. Some were leaning forward in their seats, their faces showing genuine curiosity. A few whispered to each other, "I had no idea he could play like that," or "He's amazing." Those words, soft as they were, carried a lot of meaning. Ayan realized that sometimes people need to see your actions before they believe in you. The principal stepped back slightly, letting I absorb the moment. There was no more pressure, no hidden intent. For the first time, the hall was witnessing him not as a subject of judgment, but as a performer, an artist, a boy who had spent years mastering something he loved. And Ayan felt something shift inside him. The fear, the doubt, the anxiety that had been there when he first stepped on stage, they were slowly melting away. He thought about the other students, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had ignored him. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel revenge. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that could not be taken away. He had proven something not only to them but to himself. He had faced the challenge, turned it around, and shown his true self. The music teacher later came forward, standing quietly beside the principal. "Ayan," they said softly, "I knew you had talent, but I never imagined you could perform like that in front of everyone. You have a gift? Don't hide it." Their words were gentle but powerful, a recognition that meant more than any grades. Awards or praise from others. Ayan smiled, feeling a sense of connection. He realized that talent was not just about skill, it was also about courage. Courage to step forward, courage to face judgment, courage to trust in oneself. Today he had done all of that. Today, the quiet boy in the corner had made the entire school stop. Listen and notice him for who he truly was. The applause began to fade, and the hall slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy had changed. Students who had doubted him were quieter, more thoughtful. Teachers exchanged glances, impressed by the impact of his performance. And Ayan, walking back to his seat, felt lighter than he had in years. He had faced the moment that was meant to embarrass him and had turned it into a triumph. As he sat down, he realized something important. This was more than just playing the piano. This was about showing the world that quiet people can have loud impacts, that dedication pays off, and that courage doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers through actions that speak for themselves. Anne's journey had only just begun, but this moment was one he would never forget. The hall had settled into an unusual quietness. Anne's first notes, soft and steady, had already captured everyone's attention, but he wasn't finished yet. The music was only just beginning to unfold. He took a small pause, letting the lingering notes fill the room before continuing. There was a subtle tension in the air. Everyone wanted to see what he would do next. The students who had whispered or laughed earlier now leaned forward, their curiosity growing with every second. Ion's fingers began to move faster, dancing across the keys with skill and precision. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that words could never capture. Some notes were soft, almost like a secret being whispered. Others were stronger, filled with confidence and determination. The music seemed to float through the hall, wrapping around every person, pulling them into the world Ion had created. The principal, who had called him up with the hope of embarrassing him, now stood frozen. His arms were crossed, his usual stern expression replaced by shock. He had expected hesitation, failure, maybe even embarrassment, but this was completely different. He couldn't hide it. Aeon's music had silenced the room, and even the principal, with all his authority, felt powerless to interrupt it. The students, too, were caught off guard. Some of the most outspoken ones who had teased him in the past were now sitting in stunned silence. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. The quiet boy they had overlooked, the one they had dismissed as unremarkable, was creating something beautiful, something powerful, something they had never imagined. Their eyes followed his hands as they moved gracefully across the piano keys, each motion perfectly in sync with the melody. Even the teachers, who were used to seeing performances from more confident students, couldn't hide their admiration. The music was not just technically impressive, it was filled with emotion, depth, and feeling. They could sense the effort, the practice, and the patience that had gone into every note. Some teachers whispered to each other, nodding quietly, as if confirming the talent they had always hoped existed. Ion's heart raced, but he felt a strange calm at the same time. He knew this was his chance to show who he really was, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. He had spent countless hours practicing, learning every note, correcting every mistake. All the frustration, all the struggles, every lonely evening alone with the piano, it had prepared him for this moment. And now, in front of everyone, he was finally able to shine. As the music swelled, the energy in the hall shifted. The whispers and laughter from before had completely disappeared. Instead, there was a sense of awe, a sense of being transported by something greater than themselves. Each student, each teacher, each observer felt it, the power of music to communicate what words cannot. Some students even leaned closer, as if trying to catch every subtle sound, every nuance of emotion. Ion didn't rush. He let the music flow naturally, building and releasing, creating a rhythm that seemed alive. Some notes were playful, almost teasing, while others were deep and serious, pulling the listeners into a story they could feel in their hearts. He wasn't just playing notes, he was expressing himself, revealing his determination, his courage, and his quiet strength. The principal, realizing that he had completely misjudged the boy, shifted his stance. His pride had been challenged, and he couldn't help but feel a mix of surprise and admiration. He had meant to humiliate Ion, to prove a point, but instead he had witnessed something extraordinary. The boy had taken a moment meant to embarrass him and transformed it into a performance that no one could forget. Even the students who had been skeptical were now whispering in awe. "He's incredible," one said quietly. Another shook their head in disbelief. "I never knew he could play like that." It was a turning point. People who had dismissed him were now forced to rethink everything they thought they knew about him. The quiet boy in the corner was no longer invisible. He had demanded attention in the most graceful way possible. Ion continued, moving seamlessly from one melody to the next. Each transition was smooth, each chord deliberate and purposeful. He could feel the energy in the hall, the way people were holding their breath, hanging onto each note. He realized that his music was doing more than just entertaining, it was teaching a lesson. It was showing that talent doesn't need to be loud. That strength doesn't always come in the form of confidence or attention-seeking. And that true mastery comes from dedication and heart. As the final notes approached, Ayan played with even more intensity. The hall seemed to vibrate with the sound, each chord resonating in the walls and the hearts of those listening. The students, who had come expecting a performance that would end quickly or embarrass him, were now completely captivated. The teachers, too, were silent, watching every move with admiration. Even the principal couldn't look away, caught in the beauty of the moment. When the last note finally faded, the hall remained silent for a moment longer, as if everyone was trying to absorb what they had just experienced. Then slowly the applause began. It started as a few scattered claps, but quickly grew into a thunderous wave of appreciation. Students were standing now, cheering and clapping, some even whistling in admiration. The teachers joined in, and even the principal, still processing what had just happened, added his applause, though it was quieter, almost reflective. Ayan felt a mix of relief, pride, and humility. He had done it. He had faced a situation that could have been humiliating, and he had turned it into something powerful, something unforgettable. He had shown the world his talent, but more importantly, he had shown himself that he was capable of rising above fear and doubt. The principal finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. "Ayan, that was remarkable," he said. "I underestimated you, and I see now that I was wrong. You have a gift, and it deserves to be shared." The words were simple, but for Ayan they carried weight. It wasn't just praise, it was acknowledgement, respect, and a validation of all the hard work he had done in secret. As Ayan returned to his seat, the energy in the hall had completely changed. The students who had doubted him were quieter, more thoughtful, some even nodding in silent approval. The teachers were impressed, and the principal's demeanor had shifted from one of authority and judgment to one of genuine respect. For the first time, Ayan felt truly seen. He realized something important that day. Talent, courage, and determination could not be hidden forever. Even when others tried to underestimate you, the truth of your abilities has a way of shining through. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from confrontation or argument, but from quietly showing your strength in the way only you know how. As the assembly ended, Ayan walked back to his classroom with a sense of calm and quiet pride. He had not only played the piano, he had changed the way people saw him, and perhaps even the way they would see others who were quiet or underestimated. That day was more than a performance. It was a turning point, a moment of recognition, and a reminder that patience, practice, and courage could overcome any expectation. Ayan returned to his seat, his hands still tingling from the final notes he had played. The hall was buzzing, not with the usual chatter or whispers, but with genuine admiration and amazement. Students were talking quietly among themselves, pointing toward him and shaking their heads in disbelief. Even those who had once laughed or ignored him now looked at him with respect. The music had changed the way everyone saw him in a way that nothing else ever could. The principal, who had intended to humiliate him, finally stepped down from the podium. His usual stern expression had softened. He looked at Ayan, no longer with authority or judgment, but with something closer to pride. "Ayan," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I was wrong to call you up that way. I thought I could embarrass you, but instead I have learned something important. You have an incredible gift, and you should be proud of it." Ayan felt a warmth spread through him. For years, he had kept his talent hidden, fearing judgment, teasing, or disappointment. He had practiced quietly, often alone in his room, believing that no one really noticed or cared. And yet, here was someone who had once doubted him acknowledging his hard work and talent. It felt different from applause or compliments. It felt like validation, the kind that comes when someone truly sees you for who you are. The music teacher approached him as well, a smile on their face. "I always knew you had something special," they said. "But today you showed everyone, and I am proud of you. Keep practicing, and don't ever let anyone make you feel small again." Their words were simple, but they carried encouragement, support, and belief in his future. Ayan nodded quietly, feeling a mixture of gratitude and relief as he looked around. He noticed that the students who had doubted him were trying to hide their surprise. Some avoided eye contact, embarrassed that they had underestimated him. Others whispered to their friends, clearly impressed by what they had just witnessed. It was a strange but satisfying feeling for Ayan. He had never sought revenge or wanted to prove himself to anyone. He simply wanted to express himself through music. Yet, seeing the change in their expressions brought a sense of quiet satisfaction. Ayan realized something important that day. Life often teaches lessons in unexpected ways. The principal had tried to humiliate him, thinking that fear or embarrassment could teach a lesson. Instead, the lesson came from Ayan himself, not through words or confrontation, but through action and dedication. By staying true to himself, by trusting his own abilities, he had not only surprised others but had also proven his own strength. The applause began to fade, and the hall slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere was different now. People walked a little taller, spoke a little quieter, and carried a sense of reflection that hadn't been there before. The students who had overlooked Ayan now seemed to think twice about judging others quickly. The teachers, too, appeared more thoughtful. Reminded that talent often lives where it is least expected, Ayan felt a sense of pride, but not arrogance. He had learned that recognition was not the goal. The real achievement was in the journey, the hours spent practicing, learning, failing, and improving. The performance had been a moment, yes, but the hard work behind it was the real story. And that story, quiet and patient, had finally been heard. Later that day, the principal called Ayan into his office. The boy approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. To his surprise, the principal smiled, a rare and genuine smile that Ayan had never seen before. "I want to offer you something," the principal said. "You have talent that deserves guidance, and I would like you to have proper lessons and opportunities to grow. This school can support you, if you are willing." Ayan felt his heart skip a beat. He had always dreamed of learning more, of improving his skills, but his family could not afford formal lessons. This was a chance he had never imagined, a chance to develop his gift fully, to pursue something he loved without limitations. He nodded, a quiet smile forming on his face. "Thank you," he said softly, feeling a wave of gratitude he could hardly put into words. Word of Ayan's performance spread quickly through the school. Students who had once ignored him now stopped to talk, compliment, or ask questions about his piano skills. Some asked if they could hear him play again, while others were inspired to practice their own talents, realizing that dedication and effort could create extraordinary results. Ayan didn't seek attention, but he didn't shy away from it either. He had learned that talent, when nurtured and shared, could touch others in unexpected ways. The music teacher took him aside later, discussing future competitions and opportunities. They spoke about how his skill could open doors, not just in school, but beyond. Ayan listened quietly, feeling a mix of excitement and determination. He had proven himself once, but now he realized that this was just the beginning. There was more to learn, more to achieve, and more ways to express himself through music. As he walked home that afternoon, Ayan thought about the day's events. The principal's challenge, the students' surprise, the applause, and the recognition. It had all been overwhelming, but also transformative. He had learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was the decision to step forward even when you were afraid. Sometimes it was trusting in your own abilities, even when others doubted you. Ayan smiled as he passed familiar streets and neighbors, thinking about the journey ahead. He knew there would still be challenges, but he also knew something important. No one could take away the effort, skill, and heart he had poured into his music. His talent was his own, and now the world was beginning to notice. That night, as he sat in front of his own piano at home, he thought about the applause and the smiles. He began to play softly at first, then with more confidence, letting the music flow freely. It was not for anyone else this time, not for the principal, the students, or the teachers. It was for him, for the boy who had been quiet, overlooked, underestimated, but had found his voice through the piano. Ayan realized that life often presents moments that seem small or even threatening at first. But sometimes those moments are opportunities in disguise. The challenge that had once felt like embarrassment had turned into a triumph. The doubt of others had become a chance to show who he truly was. And the quiet strength he had always carried inside him had finally shone through, touching the hearts of everyone around him. As the days passed, Ion's confidence grew. He continued practicing, exploring new pieces, and challenging himself in ways he never had before. His classmates watched with newfound respect, teachers encouraged him, and even the principal made a point to support his development. The quiet boy in the corner was no longer invisible. He had become a symbol of dedication, talent, and courage, a reminder to everyone that greatness often comes from the most unexpected places. And though the applause and attention might fade, the lesson remained. True talent is not measured by who notices you first, but by the effort you put in, the courage you show, and the heart you pour into what you love. Ion had learned this lesson, and he carried it with him, not just in his music, but in life. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a bridge between his quiet world and the world that was finally beginning to see him. And for Ion, that was the greatest reward of all.